I introduce Nancy, I'd just like to say thank you very much to David and applaud him for completely conceiving of and organising this fabulous conference. And thanks everyone for attending. And it's my very great honour and privilege to introduce Nancy Cartwright, who's, I think, one of the great philosophers of science of our time. And she is going to talk to us about science in the earthly plane. Nancy.
Okay, thank you. I was asked to talk about my empiricism, and I've done a bit of what David Cobb was doing, which is try to reconstruct it, because I haven't actually ever sat down and said, you know, what kind of empiricism is it really in detail that I have. So what you're going to hear is about my empiricism, and specifically that my empiricism is scientific empiricism. So it's not an empiricism about anything else. It's an empiricism where I'm looking at only science. And as David pointed out, it's highly methodological. It's about what science should be doing, but it's also prescriptive in that it's about the purview of science. It's about what science should be doing. I think we're going to come up with a funny screen later on. There are three components to my prescriptive views. The first is about the purview of science, that science is about the empirical facts. This is, the old drag that just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. It's about wishful thinking. The picture there is from my book, The Dappled World, where he's got this wonderful wishful thinking about what his kitchen is going to be like, if only. Okay? So I'm opposed to wishful thinking. I want to urge to take the empirical world as we find it to be. And it's about ampliative inference, that baby steps, right? When you have to do ampliative inference, go in and take as tiny a steps as you can. I'm going to look first and most briefly at the last two, about wishful thinking and about ampliative inference. So take the world as we find it and don't make big inferential leaps. Why? Well, doing anything else at all is speculation. And now, when it comes to speculating in your belief system, I'm a voluntarist, just like Von Frossen. Scientists can believe what they wish, but when it comes to what science accepts as true, and especially when they use things for intervening in the world, then speculation's irresponsible. And that's the reason that we shouldn't do it. Now, I have no opposition whatsoever to bold conjectures. I was proud to have the Karl Popper chair at LSE, but I have no opposition to them so long as you don't take them as claims to truth and you don't use them to intervene in the world, especially, I often mention, don't use them to operate on my daughter, please. So that's all that I really have to say about wishful thinking and ampliative inference. I thought I'd mostly spend my time about the purview of science, which seems mostly what talks have been about. Science, I claim, is or should be about the empirical facts and only the empirical facts. Now, I should at least start by telling you something autobiographical. It's my personal assessment of some of the standard strong positions in philosophy and some of the great philosophers. So I'm anti-Plato. I don't see anything in the arguments that we're living in a cave looking at shadows rather than living in the real reality. I'm anti-Kant. Again, I can't see any of the arguments for the noumenal world behind the phenomenal world that we live in, and I'm anti any worlds like the great hidden structure of the mathematical reality of the world. I'm against it. I don't see any good arguments for any worlds that are realer than the one I live in and experience. Okay, now no matter, that's my assessment of the arguments, and I'd be prepared to discuss them as we philosophers do. But independent of my assessment of the general arguments for realities elsewhere. I have a special claim about whatever exists elsewhere when we're thinking about science and its enterprises. So whatever exists elsewhere, whether it's above, below, hidden and secret, hinted at by experience, or even more visibly reflected in experience, or it's not visible or reflected at all in experience, or it's revealed to us through grace or through genius, or never revealed at all. Anyway, whatever else exists elsewhere, and it might be I'm wrong about Plato, Kant, mathematical structures, etc. Whatever exists elsewhere is not meet quest for science. That's the empiricist stance that I take, and it's a claim, it's a prescriptive claim. That's not what science should be about. Now, the problem is there's this claim that science is about the empirical facts and about the empirical world. So it would be nice to have something to say about the empirical world. And I have a little to say about it, I realize on reflection. It's that I think I've always been a follower of Tractatus. The world is the world of singular facts. And so what is a singular fact? Well, the singular fact is about, singular facts are about individual things. And the facts, you know, what it says about them is the facts are about individual things exhibiting certain features, or being of a certain kind, or having relations to one another, including causal relations. You probably all know that I've spent a lot of time defending that I don't see any reason that causal relations or any second-class citizens that have somehow to be introduced later into the world. They've been there all along, and they're just as good as any others. So the world is the world of singular facts. Singular facts are about individual things, either exhibiting features, being a certain kind, having relations to one another in space and at times. Okay. Things, I could say a tiny bit more about things. They're things that can be tagged with a name, as Bloch and Marcus suggested. And beyond that, I haven't seen any need or use in thinking about science that have a metaphysics of what it is to be a feature and what it is to exhibit a feature. Now, it might be that you can convince me otherwise, and we really need to think about that. But I haven't yet seen where we're getting in trouble on the issue, whereas I do think we get in trouble when we don't stick to the empirical facts. Okay. Now, for science, excuse me, I claim everything that is true in virtue of the empirical facts. Now, it might be that there are things that are true outside the realm of science, or not true for science, but are true, but they're not within the purview of science. But everything for science, everything that is true in virtue of the empirical facts. So here's a fact. That falling apple, let's call an A. Okay. In this case, or as in all cases actually, but the force on that, I'm going to call an atom the apple. The force on atom is equal to F, some number F. The mass of atom is M. And the acceleration of atom is A. And the facts are such that F equals M times A. So, sorry, it should have been F of A equals M of A times A of A. So we're only making a claim here about the facts based on atom, right? So we have individual facts about atom, and in virtue of these individual facts, there's another fact about atom, that the force on atom, the force experienced by atom is equal to atom's mass times atom's acceleration. So that's what I mean. That's an example of what I mean by something being true in virtue of the empirical facts. This idea or insistence has implications for the semantics of general claims. So general truths in science, according to me, the general truths, that those are, by that I mean those with a universal probability or vague generally quantifier. General truths in science must be generalizations of the empirical facts. And the reason for that is that's all there is in the purview of science for the generalization to be and to represent. that has led me then to this instrumentalism about laws. Scientific laws then tend to be reconstructed by us, philosophers usually, with some kind of general quantifier in front, universal, probabilistic, a vague general quantifier. Scientific laws, if they were to be true, they would have to be made true by empirical facts, not by the fact that they are written in God's stone tablets, not by the fact that they're written in Platonic heaven, and not by the fact that they're hidden somehow structural reality that we behind or beneath the empirical facts. So if there are true laws, they should be made true by empirical facts. And they should be, if they're generalizations, if they're general operators in front of them, they should be general quantifiers in front of them, sorry. They should be generalizations of the facts. Now, take that as a desideratum, and the problem is that I've never been able to find quantifiers for conditional phrases. And what kind of quantifiers can I use for the, our most vaunted laws? What kind of quantifiers or conditional phrases can I use that makes them simultaneously able to do a number of jobs? So first of all, we were looking to wonder whether they could be true. So find some formulation of, say, the laws of physics or economics, some set of laws of economics, find some formulation that makes them true to the facts as we find them, not true to some made up facts in Platonic heaven, or facts as we might wish them to be, but true to the actual facts as we find them, simultaneously with retaining the predictive power of the laws and retaining their explanatory power. Because I've never been able to find that, hence instrumentalism. And this particular set of things is argued in some detail in the book on Nature of the Artful Modeler. Okay. Now that means I've then left a lot of heavy lifting for this word empirical, right? So science is to be about the empirical facts. What on earth are empirical facts? Well, I'm in the same boat as a lot of other philosophers too. The logical empiricists, we heard Thomas talking a lot today about the use of empirical and, for instance, in the protocol sentences debate. Michael Strevens, very recently, he tells us that the scientific method consists in the single fact that science must conduct all disputes with reference to the empirical facts alone. So all of us are using the notion of empirical facts without a whole lot helpful to say about them. Science institutions do the same thing. This is the US National Academy of Science writing on evolution and creationism. Scientists seek explanations of natural phenomena based on empirical evidence, or they say science is a way of knowing that differs from other ways in its dependence on empirical evidence and testable explanations. The National Academy of Science is talking about teaching about evolution in science, says explanations that cannot be based on empirical evidence are not part of science. Under the heading, aren't scientific beliefs based on faith as well? They say, usually faith refers to beliefs that are accepted without empirical evidence. Science differs from religion because it is the nature of science to test and retest explanations against the natural world. The US National Research Council, talking about scientifically based education research, says they give us a lot of principles guiding scientific research and education. And the very first scientific principle is pose significant questions that can be investigated empirically. So all of us put in lots and lots of weight on what it is to be empirical. And I don't think any of us have any very good accounts of what that means. Now, so what are the empirical facts? Well, I follow Autonoy on almost everything. It's the exhibiting in space and time by taggable things of features, relations, and kinds. Now, you may be okay that I've been really helpful in delimiting empirical facts from other possible facts or non-facts by talking about exhibiting in space and time of taggable by taggable things. But then you might not be at all happy with, though I haven't said anything, any restrictions on features, relations, and kinds. So have I got nothing more to say here? No, I don't. And I want to take a leaf from von Frossen and his constructive empiricism, and something that was mentioned, but I don't think stressed as much as I think it needs to be. Boss tells us that science should be empirically adequate, and that means get the features right of things that are observable with the naked eye. That's what empirical adequacy is, getting it right about things that are observable with the naked eye. So he talks about we can observe the jet stream, but not the jet. Now the question is, if you're supposed to get the features of observable things right, which features? Observable features? Well, Bounce argues that that's nonsense, that there just isn't any distinction between observable features and unobservable features, that all feature language is theory laden. Okay? So he tells us you can see the tennis ball, so that's an observable thing, but you can't see it as a tennis ball. That's theory laden. So it's not that you can't observe it. You can't observe the fact that it's a tennis ball. You can see the tennis ball, but you can't see that it's a tennis ball. Now that raises a real puzzle, and a peculiarity. The puzzle is why care, especially about things we can observe. And I did think that there was at least one epistemic answer to it. It means that at least the subject of our claims is epistemically secure. If you've observed the jet trail, then, or you've observed the tennis ball, then it's the least certain that there's the subject of what you're claiming is there, is true. We're not in any doubt about the existence of the subject. The peculiarity is that, turns out to be that these kinds of claims then are okay. They're the kind of claims that we need to get right as a constructive empiricist, that my tea is full of quarks. So now that I think a lot of people just find very peculiar, that we, as a constructive empiricist, we should be getting right these very, very odd kind of what at the time would have been thought of as theoretical facts. But I think following von Frossen, that's just what we want. Until I get talked out of it, I don't see any reason to have restrictions. I think good reasons not to have restrictions on the kinds of features science studies. So we should not be pre-deciding that these must be of a certain type. And for example, I really find it very odd that colleagues are arguing that that science must study the physical, and all of science reduces to the physical, until they've actually been able to show that. Prejudging that science must study just physical features is entirely speculative, and it seems to me out of court. Science should find out what features empirical things exhibit and not prejudge them. So, for example, I'm entirely in favor of Oliver Lodge's late 19th century psychical research. Now, I agree that I don't want to write Lodge's claims into the canons of science, but it's not because his claims are not generalizations of empirical facts. It's because they are not well warranted to be generalizations of empirical facts. The very facts that he's generalizing from aren't well warranted enough to, in the first place, let alone generalizations from them. So I refuse them, not from a demand for scientific empiricism, but from the demand for high standards of warrant. So that brings me back to one of my other prescriptive demands on science, is that I insist on baby steps. And you know, I've got really very high. I think it's appropriate and irresponsible not to have very high standards of warrant where anything depends on it. So I have only a few parting thoughts. And it's really this one to raise for discussion. You may part company with me over issue features. Okay? Maybe I am too liberal, and maybe there is some reasonable alternative to just saying it's totally open. Science should discover what the features of empirical of objects in space and time are. So I'm very happy to consider and hope that if somebody else can come up with a good alternative. But I do want to demand that the alternative makes discovering what kinds of features there are a job of science and doesn't allow presumptions like presumptive physicalism, etc. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nancy.